mention freedom because frei is a Yiddish play on the word free, which a lot of people who leave the Orthodox community name themselves, not name themselves, but refer to themselves as frei, and also because it speaks to frei being free to live a self-determined life. Freedom is based in New York with regional communities across North America, including Lakewood, South Jersey, Philadelphia, Boston, Baltimore, D.C., South Florida, Cleveland, Detroit, Chicago, Los Angeles, Phoenix, and Toronto. Since its founding in 2012, more than 1,400 courageous members have found support at Freedom. Thank you again for joining us. It's great to have you. And on that note, I'll hand it over to our moderator, Dr. Ayala Fader.
Good. So thank you, Jean. Hello to everybody and welcome. It's a real pleasure to be able to moderate this conversation with you all. Before we begin, I'm going to briefly introduce myself. I'll say a few words about the impetus for this panel. I'll introduce our panelists, and then we'll have a conversation among the panelists. And then finally, we're saving some time at the end for you all to ask questions. So again, my name is Ayala Fader. I'm a professor of anthropology at Fordham University. I'm the author of 2 books, Mitzvah Girls, Bringing Up the Next Generation of Hasidic Jews in Brooklyn, and just out this month, Hidden Heretics, Jewish Doubt in the Digital Age. So the Netflix series Unorthodox, a fictionalized account of Deborah Feldman's memoir, is really a catalyst for our conversation today. My friends and colleagues and now journalists always ask me, is it authentic? Is it accurate? So I can only imagine what those of you who were brought up in similar ultra-Orthodox communities to this miniseries must get asked by other kinds of Jews and by non-Jews. And I've also heard through the grapevine that from communities have been discussing the show as well, debating its accuracy and its truth. So our panel today has really been inspired by that interest and the questions sparked by the series. And we're lucky today to bring together 3 people whose stories, while they share some themes with Unorthodox, also differ in significant ways, so really showing the diversity. The goal for today is to have a discussion about that diversity of experiences for those who've chosen to leave their communities, their ultra-Orthodox communities. But before we begin, I do also want to note that while ultra-Orthodox communities are very concerned about people leaving what sometimes gets called going OTD or off the derech, demographically, in fact, these communities are growing and thriving. And for many, perhaps the majority, living ultra-Orthodox lives is unproblematic. But for those who either do not fit in or can't or won't, there can be consequences, which is what our topic is for today. So let me now introduce our panelists. Gene Steinberg, who you've already met, was born and raised in the Hasidic village of Kiryas Yol. At age 28, he left Orthodox Judaism to live a life more aligned with his personal values. He's the founder, as you heard, and executive director of Freedom, an organization that provides community and social support and emotional support for those questioning or leaving their communities. And Steinberg is also the co-founder of Kind Ear, a Yiddish and English phone support hotline that serves Orthodox and formerly Orthodox Jewish communities. Malki Wegder was born, raised, and married in the Hasidic community of Satmar in New York. Malki fought for her and her children's freedom to live a self-determined life. Malki is now active in helping others. She provides peer support, practical guidance, and advocacy for those in the process of leaving, those still grappling with monumental choices, and those who try to stay. And finally, Ellie Rosen, born and raised in the Hasidic community of Borough Park in Brooklyn. Ellie is a recovering corporate litigator who now serves as the managing director of the New Yiddish Repertory Theater and is a Yiddish cultural consultant for film and television. His many credits on stage, TV, and film include the Netflix hit series Unorthodox. So many of you must have seen him in that. And Ellie is also a founding board member of Freedom. So on to our actual discussion now. So Unorthodox presents Esti, or Shiraz's leaving, as a rupture, a relatively clean break. And the multiple factors that prompted are actually kind of ambiguous, left that way for many to think about. In fact, for many, however, the leaving process is complicated. So can you tell us each what prompted your own leaving? What made you begin to question or not fit in or not feel like you could stay anymore? And Ellie, why don't you begin?
Hello. Thank you so much. I'm really, really happy to be here. I have known all of you for quite some time as part of this community of people that have either left the Hasidic community or that are, as in the case of Ayala, closely associated. And perhaps we can call you an ally of those who have left the Hasidic community. To answer the question as briefly as I can, I would say that I was kind of a model student in yeshiva until puberty, really. Until then, you know, I was the kid who was always toddling in the siddur, always pointing at the right place. Got 100 on every test. Never asked questions. Never ran around in shul with the other kids. I was a very well-behaved child. And then right around the age of 12 or 13, you know, with all the hormones and all the craziness that was happening inside my body, I was also starting to explore intellectually. I started reading a lot. I guess I had all these questions bubbling up inside my head. And I discovered a bunch of textbooks that belonged to my mother from when she went to college, which she briefly did to an all-woman school under college. And so I immediately discovered that what they say about kind of not being any chachma begoyim al talmud, that there's no wisdom among the nations, and that the Torah has somehow a monopoly on wisdom. I immediately saw that to be kind of a lie, and I started wondering what else is out there, what else have I been deprived of, what else has been concealed from me. And this led me on this very long, drawn-out journey, and it ultimately took 20 years for me to finally leave at age 32, 33. But there was a lot of ups and downs, a lot of struggles. Some of it was intellectual, some of it was kind of philosophical, some of it was emotional. But all along the way, it kind of always came back to that seed that was planted when I was 12. And I don't know, like I still have this very, very vivid visual in my head of when I was 17 and I was in the kitchen with my mother and my brother. And I said, and this is after they kind of knew that I was having issues and that I was questioning. And I finally realized what was bothering me all that time. And I asked, how is it possible? What moral justification is there for any kind of God or supreme being to demand us to believe in him when we sincerely do not believe in him? And I think that was kind of the core question, the core trigger for me. But then I kind of made my peace with it. I don't know how. I spent years kind of fooling myself and lying to myself. I became a little bit more modern, and I kind of settled into this pretty comfortable life. But then slowly I started realizing that my values, my social values that I picked up in law school, my very progressive values, just did not at all align with my religion, with my Yiddishkeit, until one day I admitted to myself that I no longer believe. So that's kind of it in a nutshell.
Thank you. Malki, you want to pick up?
Hi, everyone, and thank you for having me. And characterizing this process as complicated is such an understatement. There are, especially from the distance of time, and from that perspective, it kind of seems almost straightforward and inevitable, looking back to the beginnings. But at the time, there are so many factors that play into it: the intellectual, the philosophical, the emotional, the social, the familial, all of that. And it's kind of difficult to go back and dig into what was it that started it. For me, I grew up in a small town outside of New York City, Cary, which is a Satmar enclave. It might as well be on a different continent. We spoke almost exclusively in Yiddish. We were entirely cut off from any outside knowledge, connection, social interaction. You were essentially born into what I always felt was kind of like a play. You were handed the script, you were assigned a role, you had your lines, you had your costumes that you were expected to wear, and you just went through life all smoothly and reading off your script. And for somebody that enjoys or thrives off of that sort of security and that kind of stability and predictability, that could be a really wonderful way to live. And it does work for a lot of people for that reason. It didn't work for me because I had a lot of curiosity, intellectual curiosity. I wanted to know about different cultures. Some of it arose out of the fact that because my parents didn't speak English, I was their translator. They would take me everywhere, whether it was government offices or immigration, anything, where I found myself as an adolescent being asked questions by strangers. Why can't your father have his fingerprints taken by a woman? And so I had to think through those answers myself and come up with those answers. And I personally wanted to understand. For me, I always felt like there was this strange, somebody goofed and there was this fluke, and I thought I was handed the wrong role and I had the wrong script, and I was just completely lost. Nothing made sense. It just wasn't me. It wasn't meant for me. It was somebody else's life. And I felt that internally, but it was also very much reinforced on the outside from others, how I was different, how I was weird. And a very big part of it is, if you ask my parents what happened, they'll tell you it was books. And the way Ellie mentioned as well, for me, it was Jewish books. Sometimes, I don't know about you guys, but when I went looking through my parents' back of the closet and nightstand drawers for something salacious that they were hiding, what I came up with was Jewish philosophy that my father was hiding from all of us because that was not acceptable in our town. And that started me down a path. I was reading a lot, but I was reading about my religion, my culture. I wanted to understand the reasons for the rules, the reason for the customs, why we believe what we believe, and to reinforce that. And that wasn't okay. Partially as a woman, as a girl, I was not supposed to be teaching myself Hebrew. I was not supposed to be studying religious texts. I was not supposed to be praying 3 times a day. And so I was constantly getting this feedback that something's off, you're weird. There were even scandals and rumors about stuff she's reading, stuff, and not comfortable in my own skin and questioning where my place was in this world. And so at the ripe old age of 18, when it was time to arrange a marriage for me, I insisted on marrying somebody from outside my immediate community, from outside of Satmar. I wanted somebody who would appreciate and support and, I guess, join me in studying and learning more and understanding more religion-wise. The big cosmic joke of that was that the man that I ultimately was pretty much forced to marry was looking for a way into the community that he was attracted to. He wanted to be part of Satmar, and I was his way in. So once again, I'm entirely miscast. I'm on stage with somebody else's script, living somebody else's life, and trying to make the best out of that.
Thank you. And Jean, do you want to go ahead?
So me not fitting in was a result of religion and the system of Orthodox Judaism, not the community members. There are many generous people in the Orthodox community who have helped me through difficult times unrelated to religion, and for that I'll forever be grateful. But my earliest recollection of me, I wouldn't say not fitting in, but questioning, I was 9 years old. I remember thinking, how do I know that the Torah is true, other than it says so in the Torah? But how is that something that I can substantiate? How do I know a God exists, other than the Torah says so? And if the Torah is not true, then maybe the whole God theory is not true. I didn't know the name God theory, but I'm saying those were my thoughts. I also had a really hard time believing that I hit the jackpot, that not only was I born Jewish, not only was I born Hasidic, which is obviously the best type of Jew, not only was I born Satmar, which is the best type of Hasidic, but I was born in Kiryas Joel, which is the holiest place of all Hasidic places. And I kept on wondering, do I believe in what I believe because I was told to? What if I was born to Christian parents? Would I then believe that Christianity is the truth? I'm sure Christian kids believe just as much that their religion is true. How can I be certain that mine is? But I really wanted to fit in. So I tried to suppress. I didn't ask those questions because I knew better than to ask. These questions were not allowed to be asked. So throughout my teenage years, I suppressed it. I had major issues with us being superior, Jews being superior than non-Jews, religious Jews being superior to non-religious Jews. Especially we were superior to non-Jews, but definitely more superior than a black person. There was a caste system in our way, the way we were raised in school, and when they wanted to refer to someone, the worst was the black person. If I misbehaved in class, a teacher would ask me, why do you behave like that? This is how black animals behave. I had a problem with that, but I couldn't make sense of it. And throughout my teenage years, I suppressed and I tried. And then came the time I was 18, time for me to get engaged, arranged marriage. And my parents sat down with me and said, I want to find a woman that you would want. You're kind of different a bit. And I don't want to find someone that I would want. I want to find someone that you would want. And I have to say, I turned white and said, they knew I meant it and I was serious. And they said, oh no, it's not as bad. And I said, I don't want you to preach. You asked me, I answered. To my parents' credit, which is the anomaly, it's not the norm. They didn't pressure me. All they did was ask me, don't tell anyone, because the stigma of having a child that doesn't want to get married is something in the community that now may affect all of my other siblings. So I didn't. But I just want to point out that my parents not pressuring me is not the norm. That's the exception. And I like to always say that my parents are as open-minded as fanatics can be. And I say it in the most loving way, and that's saying a lot. In the Hasidic community, you are not supposed to go to work before you're married. But you stay in yeshiva until you're married. So I found myself in a very difficult situation. I don't want to get married, but I also don't want to stay in yeshiva forever. Like, how do I manage that? Because I didn't have the out. If I would have gone working again, it would have affected my prospects. Wouldn't have mattered, but for my sibling. So I stayed in yeshiva till about I was 23, 24. But at age 21, longest story, but I ended up having a secular girlfriend while I'm learning in South Yeshiva in KJ. I was madly in love with her. She was a wonderful woman. And here I am struggling. How do I make sense of between the religion that I have an issue with, but I'm trying to suppress, and between the person that I love? And I knew in my mind, I was convinced that I can never marry her and my parents would accept it, that my family would accept it, because she wasn't raised secular. I mean, she wasn't raised religious. So I struggled for 2 years we were together, and I had to make the difficult decision that this woman that I love more than anything in the entire world, I felt I was stringing her along because I can't give her what she wants, because I can't marry her on the other hand. So here I am, and I made the decision to end the relationship. And after I did that, it was very difficult, but I tried to reconnect more with my religion and orthodoxy, and trying to suppress the pain of that with being more religious. But I couldn't help it. The idea that there's a human being that I love, but because we were born from different backgrounds, we cannot be together, resurfaced, and it brought back to the forefront again the questions about the questions that I had that I was trying to suppress. So this is where I realized I started living a secretly non-religious life, but this is where I got to not fitting in.
Thank you all. And actually, what you mentioned, Jean, at the end of that is people who have similar kinds of questions that you all shared, but who are not able to leave the community, either because for you three, it seems like you started to question quite young. Some of the people that I worked with had questions when they were young, were able to get married and have children, although you did multi, but decided for many different reasons that they could not actually leave their communities. And so they lived either what's called in the closet or living a double life, exactly as you say, where they're sort of publicly even with their families seem ultra-Orthodox in practice, but in private have a sort of separate life where they're exploring other worlds. And that's a whole different situation, and it brings all kinds of issues of secrecy and ethics and big decisions about moral behavior, really. It's interesting that all of you, though, were so curious as children. And I think it's important to just note that it's not that your curiosity is not allowable in ultra-Orthodoxy. It's perhaps certain kinds of curiosity that it becomes sort of dangerous to the whole structure itself. Okay, let's move on now to our second question. And I'd like you to just choose one point from your rich lives that you'd like to focus on. But what were the implications of your not fitting in or questioning? Meaning, what really began to happen when you more publicly rejected aspects of your community's way of life?
I guess for me, I mean, there was this kind of long period of just vacillating back and forth, which was incredibly difficult. I mean, there were periods in my adolescence from literally my bar mitzvah and on. I would go through months of just extreme fanatic asceticism, where I would go to the mikveh at the crack of dawn, and I would wake up middle of the night to mourn the destruction of the temple, and I would fast Mondays and Thursdays to atone for like the other half of the year when I was looking at porn and masturbating like as often as a teenage boy does. So, and I went through this in this really, really difficult struggle. I mean, and incidentally, I really believe, and this is one of my biggest issues with Orthodox Judaism in general, is that I think the worst, the greatest evil it perpetuates is this criminalization of bodies and the psychosexual damage it inflicts on children that are growing up. Irreversible damage. So but there was a lot of that, a lot of kind of not so much hiding. I mean, of course, there was hiding as well from my parents, all the time. But for me, the biggest issue was I couldn't find my balance. I couldn't find my equilibrium. I just kept bouncing back and forth between these two very extreme polarities. And then ultimately, like I said, I kind of settled down. I got married. I had a career, and I got kind of too busy in my life to even give it much thought. But then it all came back with a vengeance when I was in my 30s. And at that point, there was this period where I would spend Shabbos in the bathroom on my phone, texting my friends, because that was my only outlet. As a matter of fact, there was this one point where I dropped my phone in the toilet on Shabbos, and I had to somehow explain to my wife how that happened. And I think I speak for everyone. I think we've all had that moment. And some of us I know, we've talked about, I had friends who talked about the fact that they were terrified, even when they were doing things in secret, they were terrified to get into a car on Shabbos. Because what happens if they get into a car accident? How do they explain that? So there were certainly those moments. But for me, the worst part was constantly lying to the people that I loved, constantly lying to the people that I cared about. And that was really the reason I ultimately left. Because I just knew I couldn't spend the rest of my life doing that. But by the same token, I know I have many dear friends that have no choice and cannot leave, that are simply stuck. And of course, I don't judge them at all for having to live this double life. And they do the best they can, and we do the best we can. But for me, at the time, that was it was endangering my mental health. So I left.
One of the things that strikes me as we're going through our stories, and something I've heard so many times, is that many times people have no intention of leaving. They never plan to leave. They always were just looking for a way to reconcile their own personalities and their own values and their own passions with their way of life. And the message that we're often given is that there's something wrong with us, that we're broken. And this is where that rift begins to happen, because you either buy into that and you accept that there's something wrong with you, and unfortunately that's sometimes what people reconcile themselves to, or we have to fight back and we have to assert ourselves. And once you do that, the consequences begin rolling in, and then inevitably at some point there's no turning back. And so for me, in my early to mid 20s, I was a good, at that point, yeshivish / Hasidish, all of the best of all worlds wife. I was a teacher in a Hasidic school. I was teaching Jewish ethics and Jewish philosophy. Eventually, I was also a principal of a Hasidic school for the Jewish studies, which is also kind of hard to explain how that happens when you have an 8th grade education and you're 25. But that's one of the strange things that happen in their lives. And during that time, I just couldn't get it right. The shade of my stockings was never the right shade of beige. My skirt was either too short or too long. The tichel, the kerchief that I wore on my head, was too bright or too loud. And so as much as I tried, I always felt like something was not quite there, and the complaints were constant. I heard it from my family. I heard it from the community. And so I began to accept that there's something wrong with me. I'm not happy in my marriage. There's something really off. So I guess maybe there's something wrong with me as a wife. Might as well make this marriage work then, because this is me, it's not the marriage. And the same with the lifestyle and the community. Might as well make the best of it, because it's just, I can't fit into society. There's something off. I'm just rebellious or weird or strange. And so at one point, I felt so just, the only way to describe it is I just really felt depressed and stuck. And I decided to go see a therapist, which was a very foreign concept to me. And I showed up and I told her what has been told to me by my husband, by his friends, and by my family, that I was depressed and I needed to be fixed. I wanted to fix that depression so that I can go on and be a happy wife and be happy in my life and be satisfied with the way things are and not try to upset the status quo. And after a couple of sessions, she heard me out. She, at one point, just pushed her pad and pen away and looked me right in the eye and said to me, "Malky, you're not depressed, you're oppressed." And that was a moment where it was shock, but also recognition. It was something that I knew all along, and I just wouldn't let myself go there. I wouldn't let myself think it or accept it, because that meant I had to make changes. That meant it was up to me. And this is really where I began doing things like learning to drive. I practically moved into the public library. I was just going through the stacks, like reading everything I could. It's how I came to know very little about a lot of things. And that's where I also stopped shaving my head. I didn't want much. I wanted maybe an inch or two of hair. I didn't want to be full on bald. And obviously it was going to be covered all the time. And that's when my father gave me an ultimatum. He said, "You either shave your head by this weekend," what we call 000, which is just completely, to where you can see the scalp, or you're cut off from the entire thing. And as you can see, I kept my hair.
Thank you. Jean?
So for me, while there are many things after I left that were major struggles, and I like to think I have it good already, like secular education, difficulty getting that, getting a job without secular education, or unlearning how to view things from a non-racist or misogynist lens, because that's how I was raised as a community. Those are all struggles. But the one thing to me that I want to talk about, what was my major struggle, is actually before anyone knew I was not religious, because I came out as non-religious the day everyone found out at the same time. For 4 years or so, I lived a secret life. So there were no consequences from the community or people in the community because no one knew. But it was exactly that no one knew. That was my biggest struggle. I felt alone. I was isolated. I didn't know of any support. I don't think there was any support back then. And I didn't know of any other person who was like me, to the point that I questioned my sanity. I said, how can it be that, I don't know the number, how many hundreds of thousands Hasidim and Orthodox Jews are out there, and I'm the only one who has these questions? Maybe something's wrong with me. But I kept on telling myself, there's nothing wrong. It makes sense what you're asking. So that was a major struggle for me. And it started slowly suffocating me, the isolation, living someone who I'm not. So I needed to figure out, how am I going to live in the community while not being religious? I came up with this idea of becoming a bus driver. As a bus driver, I can leave, go away, be away for weekends. No one was going to know whether I keep Shabbat or not. I can drink my weekend away. I can live my life and be away from the community. And it worked for a while, for about, I would say, 4 years. But then after a while, it just kept coming back to me, and the suffocation of in there, that this is not who I am, was getting to me. I wasn't sleeping at night. I was losing weight, and I was skinny to begin with. And I thought that I must leave, but I was convinced that I can never leave and be happy, because that's what we're told. I was convinced that I will never not feel guilty about the pain. At the time, I believed that I am going to cause pain to my parents, to my family, to all the people in the community who love me, who have helped me, who supported me. And I had this tremendous pressure. And I came to a point where I felt damned if you do and damned if you don't. I remember this was January 9th, 2004, and I'll never forget that date. It's a Friday afternoon. I'm driving to Baltimore, and I hit low bottom. And I'm thinking I should probably just drive that bus into a head-on, hit a tractor trailer down the 95. I call my mother, tell her I love her. My mother gets concerned. What does that mean? And I said, no, I just never tell you. And I hang up the phone. I get to yeshiva in Baltimore called Ner Israel. That's where I spent the weekend, because I took a family. There was a family affair there, and that's where I drove. And I decided that I can't take this anymore. I decided that I'm going to kill myself, because escaping, living the pain of being in the community and the pain of what I thought was going to be leaving the community, to me, neither of them was a good option, and death was a better option. I remember I got a 2-liter of vodka, and I told myself, I'm going to finish 2-liter of vodka. I'm going to get alcohol poisoning, and I won't wake up. I started drinking. I woke up 18 hours later, and I saw the bottle was half empty. And it was the first time that I cursed God and said, if you exist, I'm not going to say the words I used, but I just asked, why? Why can't you let me go in peace? Why do you torture me? As I said, that was the low point of my life. And afterwards, I was very angry that I survived. I was not happy about it. But after a few days and me starting thinking of how I can do it more successfully, I had this epiphany that I don't really want to die. I just don't want to live a life that is not me. And once I realized that, I decided I'm going to go for help. And I secretly went and found a therapist. And it was a process. And what I learned through therapy was that I have a right to my life to live the way I believe is the right way. That I am not hurting anyone by living my life. It is the religion that is hurting my family, or it's their choice to believe in the religion that's hurting them. Because if they wouldn't believe in that religion, they wouldn't be upset with me. They would think I'm an upstanding citizen. So it's not me who's causing the pain, but it was very difficult to internalize, and that took time for me to internalize. I still have pain that my family is in pain because I love them. But I have zero guilt because I knew I am not causing it. So I will forever have pain that they're in pain. But I will never have guilt because I'm not causing it. And that is what saved my life. I just want to add quickly that I had bad experiences with frum therapists, and I had a good experience with a non-frum therapist, but there was also a frum therapist who himself was a Baal Tshuva, or BT as we say, someone who was not raised Orthodox, but someone who became Orthodox as an adult. And he literally saved my life by telling me that I must cut off my payas, the curls that we wear, that I am not allowed to be religious. He said, you being alive is more important than you being religious, and right now this is what you need to do. So that was my struggle.
Thank you. Malka, you want to jump in?
Yes, when I was listening to Jean, I got chills down my spine because there was something that had been sort of running through my head these last few days as I was thinking through this discussion. And it's a quote by David Foster Wallace. He talks about suicide and why people commit suicide. And just to briefly paraphrase what he's saying was that something that Jean was articulating, that people don't jump from a burning building because they want to jump or because they're not afraid of heights. They are just as much afraid of heights as the rest of us when we're just looking out a window. And they're terrified of falling. It's just that sometimes what's happening in the building, if there's a fire and the flames are coming closer, that fear, that terror is so much more unthinkable and so much more intolerable. And that agony seems worse than jumping out of the window, which is just a little bit less terrifying as burning up in a building. And I think that's something that I wish more people in the religious community would understand, is that sometimes they give us nothing to lose. And it's not that we want to leave. It's not that we're not absolutely terrified of leaving and making new lives. And it's not even, I'm used to people saying how brave I am. And we're not necessarily brave. We're just jumping out of a burning building because we can't tolerate that anymore. And so anything else seems more tolerable. And I wish people would just give their children something that they stand to lose by leaving, something to hold on to, instead of making it so intolerable the minute there's a question, the minute there's a little bit of a deviation.
I can just quickly add, in my anecdotal experience, and I say it's vast anecdotal experience in dealing with Freedom and a lot of members, I agree with Malki. I find it that people don't leave until the consequences of staying outweigh the consequences of leaving. There are consequences to leaving. And for many, there are consequences of staying. But it all comes down to an individual of which consequences are more and at what point those consequences are more. And I'll just add on that even though I agree that many of us leave not because we have to, but because we want to, but because we have to, I still want to reiterate that I think people who leave and despite the struggles are courageous and are brave.
Okay, thank you all. So, in Unorthodox, there was that fictionalized version of Feldman's memoir, touches on real life struggles, and there have been many debates about authenticity, both from within, as I mentioned, from communities and outside. Can you share any struggles depicted in the show that you experienced?
I guess I'm going to jump on that. So obviously that story is told from a woman's perspective, which by and large is very different from the man's perspective for so many reasons. Men generally have more options professionally. They have more options recreationally. They can disappear every night for hours saying that they're going to shul and just go to bars with their friends. Whereas women are so much more anchored and tethered to the family and to the home and have far less outlets and possibilities of exploring while they're still inside the community. So the experiences differ on so many levels. But you know, as for my own experiences with the show, I mean, so many, and I mean, as the consultant, I tried to do this wherever I could, kind of just throw in a little Easter egg, like a specific minig, a specific custom that was unique to my family, that I imposed upon the Shapiro family or the Schwartz family. But you know, anything from like the specific kind of bow tie coat that they eat during supper to standing up for Vihisha Amdu, which I think is my father's. I think my father's the only person in the world who does that. But anyway, I mean, for me, one of the most powerful scenes certainly was the scene where Yankee cuts off his bias in the hotel room in the name of saving the marriage, in the name of saving the relationship. And it's kind of the ultimate sacrifice for him. I very much had a moment like that where when I was 15, it was one of the times that I wanted to leave, that I tried to leave, but didn't end up working out. We lived in a multi-story home, a multi-family home. My parents lived on the second floor. My grandparents lived on the first floor. And this was shortly after my grandfather died. So my grandparents had passed and the apartment was vacant. And I would hang out in that apartment, hang out in the bathroom if I wanted to read something I wasn't supposed to read. So one night I kind of went in there. I found the most passable clothing I could find in my grandfather's closet, which was basically a trench coat and an old rain hat. That was the closest thing I had to like street clothes, to secular clothing. And I guess I found his hair clipper, and I just kind of shaved my head, shaved off the payas, left the payas, the tzitzis, the koppel, all in a heap on the kitchen, on the bathroom sink, and walked out. So, you know, just being in that room for that scene when Yankee cuts off his pious and makes that grand gesture was just overwhelming on so many levels. It was kind of the high point for me for that whole experience, that whole process of filming it. But yeah, we all had little moments like that, whether it's running away in the middle of a Seder because you can't take it anymore, or you know, hiding things on your person because you're running out on Shabbos, or the quick change, you know, kind of quick clothing changes that Esti does. I had this particular place. I had this interesting setup. I was in yeshiva at the time. This was while I was exploring, so I was actually in a non-Hasidic yeshiva, but there were plenty of Satmar kids there also in Bensonhurst. And so it was a little bit outside of the Hasidic neighborhood. And I somehow made friends with the Egyptian Arabs that ran a Army-Navy surplus store around the corner. And that was where I bought my first pair of jeans, and a few T-shirts, and I don't remember what else. I think a pair of Ray-Bans. And I stashed that they let me stash it in their store. And then whenever I wanted to change and kind of blend in, I would go to their store, go into the dressing room, come out looking like a guy, and leave and do whatever it is I would do. So there are a lot of these little moments that were very, very, very deeply personal and emotional.
It's interesting how all of you have talked about how embodied these all are, right? It's all either your hair, Malki with the shaving, right? And you with cutting off your pious. Yes, Jean. Do either of you want to add anything to that? Jean or Malki?
Well, in terms of the hair, it happens to be that even my children, when we were in family court, one of the things when they had a chance to speak with the judge, they brought up that they don't want to be forced to have longer pays than that they wanted to, and that they were being forced to shave their heads, and they wanted a little bit of hair. And to this day, I'm not the only one in the family who has trouble cutting my hair. And it's not about the hair, obviously. It's about personal autonomy, bodily autonomy, and it embodies so much of the trauma that we went through by being told how we can move, how we can walk, what we can wear, what we can do with our bodies in so many different ways, that this is just one way to take it back.
Yeah. Do you want to talk a little bit about custody, Malka? We just have a few more minutes and then we'll turn to the questions, but.
Yes, I mean, that was one of the most traumatic aspects of leaving. As a matter of fact, that was, honestly, if I think about it, that was a catalyst for leaving in the end, because initially I wanted to only leave my town. Then I wanted to leave my marriage. I wasn't leaving my community or my religion. But in the process of fighting for custody of my children, for opportunities for them, for the right to provide them an education, to take them to the library, as I said, things like that, to enroll them in appropriate schools that wouldn't make them feel like outsiders the way I grew up. In that process, that just really disillusioned me. The way it was handled in the community, the way people banded together to raise funds, to come to court and show support for my ex-husband, to even at one point hash a plan to kidnap the kids and take them to a different country. That terror went on for years. I mean, this was almost a decade back and forth of family court and the parallel system of Basin, or Jewish court. So we were going back and forth between these two forums, and obviously we're in a situation where the judges don't really understand what's going on. What are we fighting over? That the yogurt is not the right kind of kosher? Is that really significant? Is it not? So it was up to me to try to educate the judges, my own attorney, the guardians ad litem, at the same time working to support my children, helping them through the trauma and the fear and the uncertainty of what was going on, and trying to build a new life all at the same time. And so that really, in a very big way, made me see that this is not a place for us, and it will never be. We won't fit in. We won't be allowed to breathe. And I just felt so trapped because of this fight. But even more so, I think that this fight, as traumatic as it was and as difficult as it was at the time, and terrifying, and all of the panic attacks and the insane amount of money, it's just a black hole of money when you go through that. It also helped me find my voice. All of a sudden, I had to stand up there and speak for myself. I couldn't always even afford an attorney. So I'm standing up there and opposite some high-powered attorney and my ex-husband and his entire community showing up. And then it's just me. I remember overhearing a rabbi on the other side saying, "Wait a minute, she doesn't have anyone with her? It's just her?" And even he felt like there's something wrong with that picture. And I was always so shy. I used to be so shy and so quiet that I worried. I used to lay in bed at night worrying that if I was mugged or something happened, I wouldn't be able to scream. I just didn't, I didn't have a voice. I was really quiet and really reserved. And this forced me to find my voice and to figure out, who am I? What are my goals? What do I want for my family? What do I want for my children? And to have to articulate that, and why I should have the rights, and why I should be given the opportunity to do those things. And so in a way, that was the positive side of it. And that was growing pains, I guess.
Thank you. Jean, you want to jump in?
Yeah, so my connection, I wanted to just speak a lot of connections, but there were two things. One, quickly, we talked a lot about it. Friday members, we had a watch party and we discussed a theme that came up very much from many members, and I would say even to a bigger majority of women, was the speed of what in the film, in the show, Esty goes from in the community to leaving it all behind and assimilating or integrating into the mainstream society. And almost everyone agreed that's not how it is. It's years and years. It's a difficult process. It doesn't. So I thought it's important to point out that that's not accurate. I understand the show didn't have a lot of time, but that's not. But something that I wanted to talk personally that I very much connected with was there's the scene with the gun, which that wouldn't happen in the Orthodox community. Somebody leaves a gun, that's symbolic. But what does happen is the foreshadowing and telling us that you're never going to make it on the outside, that if you leave, you'll never be happy. You're going to end up killing yourself anyway. That is very real, and that struck with me because that is something that I struggled, and I know so many others who struggle with the idea that you can't be happy after you leave the community, whether it's guilt for the family, whether it's I won't be able to make it, I'm an immigrant to my own country because I don't know the norms, I don't know how to navigate mainstream society. But another point, we often hear, not from this movie, whenever there's a suicide in the Fry community, when somebody ends up killing himself, we hear, and I would say even to a fault, both from the Fry community and the Frum community, pointing fingers. Some will say, see, because of the Frum community, the person killed himself. Or say, because they became Fry, that's why they killed themselves. What's being lost in it is the mental illness aspect that no one talks about. But sometimes you'll hear it talked about from the Frum community. Look, so many people who leave the community have mental illness. And to that, I say, where do they come from, these people with mental illness? What does that say about a community that someone who has mental illness must leave? There's a lot of good going on in the community, and I think mental illness talk has improved somewhat. Definitely not where it should be. But that's a big, untreated mental illness is a big thing because everything revolves around the shidduch, a matchmaking, an arranged marriage. And if someone in the family is known to have mental illness or goes to a therapist, even though they just for their mental health, even if they don't have mental illness, that affects the family standing for a shidduch. So there's a big problem there. Lastly, I want to say, we talk about how many people who leave the community who kill themselves. We don't talk about how many people who stay in the community who kill themselves because they think they have no choice and they have no option. And staying is suffocating, as in was my case, and leaving, we think, is suffocating or won't work. Therefore, suicide is a better choice, or so we think. Had I been successful in my suicide, it would have never been chalked up to any. First of all, it would have probably been covered up in the community. But even if it wouldn't have been, it would have never been chalked up as someone who's struggling to fit in the community. So we only talk about those who leave and end up killing themselves. We don't talk about those who stay and end up killing themselves. And I think that's an important issue to bring to the forefront.
Thank you. We're gonna turn to the questions now. A lot of the questions sort of piggyback onto the rest of the conversation we're gonna have. So that should work out. So a number of people have asked the question, what was the hardest part about leaving? Tell me about part two. What are you doing now? Especially with interest in your family relations with extended families too. So anybody can just jump in at this point.
So I'm going to say that, again, as I said in the beginning, my family relations was not strained, but I always stress it that I'm the exception, not the rule. But I am very lucky that I have loving family, that we love each other despite our differences, that the way I communicated with my parents and my family is respect is a two-way street. If I were to respect you, I expect that you respect me. So I don't respect your religion. You don't respect my lifestyle. But all I'm asking is respect my right as an adult for autonomy. respect my right to make choices. I disagree with your religion. I disagree with the lifestyle you live on so many levels from moral and ethical standpoints. But it's not for me to tell you how to live your life. I respect your right to choose. I also respect my parents and my family a lot because they've earned it, but not just because they're my parents. But I think that is and I say that I have a really good relationship with my family, and that's been the case until today. I hope that continues after this panel.
Yeah, I have to say the same. I feel like I've been successfully kind of straddling that point between being kind of out as Fry and giving my parents enough plausible deniability so that their world, their community, their social circle doesn't necessarily know the extent of my deviation from their lifestyle. I mean, I always had a lot of leeway because, I went to law school, I became a lawyer, which is kind of the only acceptable way to modernize within the Hasidic community. I dressed a little different, but it was okay because I was a lawyer. And so my parents kind of always hid behind that. So I think people will be shocked to find out that is no longer the case. But I do have a wonderful relationship with my parents. I'm also very lucky to be able to say that I'm the exception to the rule. I have a wonderful relationship with them. It took a lot of hard work. It took years of heartache. They're always very, very clear to say that they don't condone my lifestyle. And they're continuously praying that I will return one day and hoping that it's a phase. But we kind of have this, I guess, mutual respect to some extent. And I think really it comes down to the fact that we both know that our relationship with each other is more important than anything else. And that's really all you can hope for.
I think I need to backtrack a little bit in order to talk about this next phase. And that's a scene that I related to very much and seems incredibly implausible in Unorthodox. Jean mentioned the scene with a gun. First of all, that not literally a gun, but things like that have happened. If I would describe these types of things, gangs being hired to beat me up and put me in the hospital, stalking, wiretapping, following me around and terrorizing me, and all of these kind of things, it seems sort of unbelievable, really. You just wanted to leave your husband, you wanted to change how you dress a little bit, and that's what they did. It just makes no sense. Something's off, something's wrong, or you're imagining it. But that literally happened to me. And I remember at one point, I didn't know what to do, and I was terrified. And I had little understanding of how things work in the world. So I went around the corner to a payphone next to my house, and I looked up the number for the local FBI office. And I just dialed the number, and whoever answered, I said to them, "This is my name, and this is the town I live in. And since I've been trying to leave an abusive marriage, the leadership of the town and many people in the town have been terrorizing me and stalking me and listening in on my phone calls and threatening anybody who was trying to support me." And this guy said, "Okay, write it all down, write the whole story in a letter and mail it in to us." And so he clearly was thinking, I'm crazy, I'm paranoid, right? I mean, this doesn't sound like a really plausible thing to happen, not in New Jersey in 1998. I mean, come on. And if this is one of the things that I hope will come out of a show like Unorthodox and similar shows is to bring a little bit more awareness. And that's what I was going to say about Jean was speaking about that too, is that there is this entire cottage industry of counselors who are not trained or licensed therapists for the most part, rabbis who serve as in different roles as counselors and who collaborate with therapists and psychiatrists in the mental health community, and as well as attorneys and the family justice system. And there's so much there that's unethical and just trampling on boundaries and trampling on confidentiality. And especially being a woman, I was so vulnerable. I mean, people were sexually inappropriate rabbis, therapists, so-called therapists, and I had no recourse because I was the problem person here. And so I'm hoping that the family justice system, the mental health community begins to build a little bit of a cultural competency when they see people like us and understand that this is not exaggerated and this is real and this happens, and treat it accordingly as something validated, I guess. So yes, and that's something that, to answer your question about what I'm doing now, where I'm now, this is one of the things that I've been doing is a lot of, I've been in touch and meeting with people in the legislative reform community, in the family justice community, in just general social justice community, social services, things like that, women's shelters, to educate them and to help them understand this demographic and to help them understand the nuances of what they're dealing with. And I think there needs to be so much more of that. And in the meantime, I do what I can to just hold people's hands, look through their legal paperwork, refer them to an attorney, show up to court with them so they're not the only person on their side of the courtroom. But I really would love to see a lot more of that from people who are actually trained and competent to be doing this kind of work.
If I can just quickly add on your point about the therapies. Something that I was really disappointed when I was in the community and was searching, and all I would wish for was someone who was there to help me without an agenda for what it is that I'm dealing with. And I found that a front therapist was really, and I'm not indicting every front therapist, I'm just giving experience, and I also am repeating experiences that a lot of members share with me, where we feel that this individual has a certain viewpoint of how we should live life, and then they're trying to help us get to their viewpoint rather than focusing on where the individual is, where I wanted to be at the time. And the same went with Kiruv rabbis. Kiruv rabbis means somebody help me here. Risa, Ellie, help me out here what a Kiruv rabbi is.
Outreach.
Who try to bring people back or keep them in the fold. And I went genuinely, I'm not talking after when I was no longer religious and people started wanting to send me. I said when I was still in and wanted to actually stay and have questions, I had genuine questions that they didn't have answers, and they resorted to dismissive tactics where I asked a question. They said, oh, you probably were molested as a child. That's the only reason you have questions. And I was like, okay, you know what? Hypothetically, that's the case. Fine. And that's what makes me ask. But do you have an answer to the question? Which that's where it ended. Or another one who told me, you know what your problem is? You're too smart. So I asked him, you're telling me your religion only works for people who are not smart? I mean, the point I'm making is that all I wanted at the time was someone who truly cares about me as an individual and where I'm struggling with, which brings me to the point you asked, what are we doing now? When I was at the bottom pit, I promised myself, when I decided I do want to live, I just need to find a way that I can live. I promised myself that if I ever make it out alive from the community, that I will do anything within my power to help others. And for a lot of people after we leave, and myself included, there's this loss of magical thinking. We were raised that everything I pray and everything's going to be fine. And when that's taken away, now everything is reality, and we weren't trained on how to deal with reality. So that's a very difficult thing. It was difficult for me. It was very difficult for a lot of our members who expressed, what do I do now? And for me, I found myself that this is my calling. This is my doing. I just am very proud of it, so I'll mention it. I was selected to a very prestigious scholarship by Jack and Coke Foundation, and I could have had a full ride to go to Columbia, which I was planning on being a social worker, but that would have meant that I would have had to shut down Freedom and would have not been able to support our members the way I do now. It was a difficult decision, but I gave it up because I couldn't help but think of myself and how much I wanted the support when I was in the community, that I could not deny that to someone else. And I said, I'm not going to go and become a social worker and hopefully down the road help someone. I'm going to continue. And that's where I'm at. That's my life mission.
I'm going to pose two more questions to you. A lot of people have asked about how you consider yourself Jewishly now, or are you just spiritual? Do you think if you had been brought up modern Orthodox, you would have not left your community? So a lot of questions around this particular version of Judaism that you all grew up in, relatively similar, and how that affects you now, and also your understanding of how that shaped your decision to leave.
Yeah. So I'll just say that the question of do you think you would have left if you grew up modern Orthodox? I mean, that's frankly disingenuous. And it's basically what's implied in that is, of course, the only reason you left is because you were actually in the wrong religion, and our religion is the right one. And that's besides for the fact that many of us have spent years and years and years struggling with every aspect of Judaism and trying to find a version of Judaism that actually fits, that works for us. I kind of, I tried to study and research all the source texts and all the kind of movements within Orthodox Judaism, Hasidic and non-Hasidic, and other philosophies as well. I don't think the issue was with Hasidic Judaism per se, although I have to say, in many respects, and for many of us, I think I speak for many of us when I say that if we feel any connection to Judaism at all, it is only to Hasidic Judaism. So again, the notion of us possibly leaving that for another form of Judaism is kind of silly. But also, it's very disingenuous because our very education, our very upbringing is premised on the fact that it is all or nothing. It is this or nothing. Every other version of Judaism is wrong and lesser. And then, of course, when you leave, they then turn and say, well, you didn't have to leave everything. You could have practiced a less onerous form of Judaism. And, of course, you want to scream, now you tell me it's okay when I've already left. But no, I think a lot of the problems that we face, a lot of the questions that we face, yes, many of them are cultural, many of them are not necessarily prescribed by the Torah, but they're symptomatic of a larger systemic problem within the value system. And asking why don't you practice another form of Judaism is as legitimate as why don't you practice Buddhism or Islam? I guess the answer to that is, why should I?
If I can jump in, I can't say that if I was raised modern Orthodox, I would or wouldn't have left. That is hypothetical and speculation. And I would say the fact that we have so many modern Orthodox Friday members begs the question, is that really, why did they leave if they were raised modern Orthodox? But I can't say that part. But I can say that while I was secretly not religious and people on the outside thought I was Hasidic and people didn't know, I spent 3 years almost every weekend, or I shouldn't say every weekend, but a lot of weekends and a lot of time during the week, I spent in Upper West Side hanging out with modern Orthodox people. And I hung out with both secular Jews who were thinking of becoming religious. I hung out with people who were raised modern Orthodoxy, because I really thought, you know what, maybe if there's a little, because are some things that they're less stringent or more leniency. They go to school, higher education, and a few other things. And I thought, oh, maybe that's all I want. What I came to realize is that this is modern Orthodoxy, Hasidic, ultra-Orthodoxy. From my standpoint, where I was searching and it was all the same. They believe in the same God. They believe in the same Torah. My question was not whether my community I found to be a very loving community. And if I were to fit in and believe in it and be okay with everything ethically and morally, that's the place where I belong, because that's what I understand. And I think there's a lot of beauty in it too. But I say that I didn't leave. People ask me, when did you leave the community? And I usually say, I didn't leave the community. I left the fold, which is something for me to be able to not leave the community was only able because I left the fold. I couldn't be in the community and be religious. So I, like Ellie said, I find it disingenuous. People say, oh, that's why. Oh, because you were raised. So, I want to add one quickly thing. You asked where I am, if I'm spiritual. So there was this rabbi who was trying to convince me that I am spiritual. And I asked him, you're telling me what I am? I told him, I don't think I'm spiritual. I have no connection with I like the food, but that's not spiritual. I have no longing for any of the spirituality that I was raised with. And he said, you don't understand. Spirit is the soul, and there's emotional. So spiritual is a connection between you have a soul and emotional. I said, in that case, I'm emotional.
So I can say that I have made a truly valiant effort to integrate into the modern Orthodox community. First the Yeshivish community and then the modern Orthodox community. My children, some of them were in modern Orthodox high schools. I had to fight really hard to get them in there because the modern Orthodox community can be a little bit snobbish. And they did really well there, went on to some of them modern Orthodox universities or Yeshiva University. And we are still connected in some ways to the modern Orthodox community, especially my children. But that wasn't sustainable, because while I was fully committed and I always planned to be this bubby who was going to have a bunch of married modern Orthodox children and many little grandchildren, and I was going to continue to play the part. Never had any intention of doing anything else or coming out publicly and changing them. It just happened that my children, each in their own time and in their own way, and probably some of it was by osmosis, they are my children, but it was definitely not deliberate and intentional. They began to have their own questions and their own discomfort with a lot of issues. I remember my son was watching, I wish I could remember the name of the movie, but it was depicting a slave escaping and being chased and beaten. And I was trying to explain to my son why he's being beaten, that this person owns him and, you know, is bringing him back, and he considers him his property. And my son was incredibly outraged, and he said, "What do you mean? How can one person own another person?" And it struck me in that moment two things. First of all, he's not getting any education. He knows nothing of history, and we got to change that. And secondly, but I don't think he's ever going to make it in this community, because he's developing a conscience and a sense of justice that's not going to work for him in this community, and it didn't. A lot of the customs that were still connected to the holidays, the food. I have to say that there was a period of several years when my children were spending holidays with their father, most of the Jewish holidays, that I was in a complete detox. I wanted nothing to do with any of it. I wasn't interested. I didn't want to do it ever again. And when I was with my children, essentially, I realized that I was sneaking around them and they were sneaking around me. And so at one point, we all just got on the same page and we said, we're going to do it our way. We don't have to give up the things that we enjoy. We're going to continue doing holidays the way we feel like doing it, the parts that we enjoy, the parts that are meaningful to us or resonate with us in some way. But even that has become more difficult because it's kind of, it takes a leap to be able to recite prayers or sing certain songs without really listening to what you're saying. So if one of my children is bringing home a significant other who's not Jewish, and all of a sudden I'm standing up there and I'm trying to explain what this blessing is, and it's essentially saying that we are special and elevated over all of the other nations. What am I saying? I don't believe that. I don't buy into that. So I had to stop really paying attention to the context or the subtext and just enjoy it. Just sit outside in my shorts and sing a Shabbos song, and if the neighbors think that's weird, then I've always been weird in that way. And so at the moment, I live in the middle of a Hasidic community. Most of my neighbors are Hasidic at this point. A lot of them are Satmar. I get along with them. We're good friends. I don't feel the need to leave. People are asking me all the time. One of the reasons why is because I want to be that home and that place where my friends who are still in the closet and who do need a place to go when they're supposed to be fasting, but they really are dying for a cup of coffee, or when they're supposed to be at prayers and they have to be somewhere. So they come and hang out and read a book in my house. And so I wanted that to continue for as long as I'm able to remain in this place. And that's as far as my connection is, because in terms of my immediate family or my family of origin, I'm completely cut off from them. And that's how it should be, unfortunately. But at the end of the day, I'm watching my children living their lives, making their choices, getting the education they want, pursuing the careers that they're passionate about and being successful at it. And just having experiences that I would never dream of for myself, hardly even dare to dream for them, and just surpassing everything. And I know it was all worth it. And all of the pain and all of the trauma, it just pales in comparison to where we are all now.
It's reading memoirs, watching like the shows or all the others, maybe retweeting or social media, amplifying voices of those who write about this struggle, follow organizations and support organizations that deal with this struggle, whether it's financially supporting them, whether it's offering professional services as an in-kind donation. I want to say that I want to point out that we're not the only one doing work. There's Freedom, there's Footsteps, there's Yafed, which is a different issue for bettering education, secular education in the Orthodox community. There's Unchained at Last, which is trying to end, in the US, try to end arranged marriage. So there are many ways, and it would be very much appreciated because the struggle is real, as they say.
Yes. I want to thank you all for joining us. Thanks to the panelists for sharing such intimate and moving stories with us. And thank you all for joining. Good night.
Can I just quickly thank the panel and Dr. Ayala Fader. Thank you for a wonderful job. And before I leave, I want to quickly also shout out and a big thank you to my life partner, Mary, who is the behind the scene of Freedom and behind the scene of me and this wouldn't have been able to happen without her, and nothing at Freedom would be able to happen without her. So thank you. And
Okay. Good night, everyone.
good night.
Good night. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.